This is the follow-up parable right after the parable of the lost sheep and of the lost coin and the prodigal son. Here's the next parable that no one has ever told you. And it's just like not a common parable because it's just, is this me? Is it you? Am I doing this? I don't know. It's not me. I don't think it's me. I'm not doing anything. But now when I'm not doing anything, it stops. So that seems suspicious. That seems suspicious if that's the case.
It's definitely.
This may be a little hot. Let me turn it down to this. All right. So it's just a little bit of an unknown parable. It's a little bit of a challenge. The second part, kind of the application portion of this, you'll have heard before. You've definitely read that, like a servant can't serve two masters. You either love one and hate the other. You can't serve both God and money. So you've heard that point. So we almost know the application at the end. But let's look at the parable that he gets there. But before we get there, there's a story I've seen run online. It's like I think it's a joke. You might have seen this bounce around the internet since once you write something, it just goes everywhere. So they'll have a little joke thing goes is that this guy had moved to the country from the city and he's trying to build a farm and this is kind of like a hot thing. These city folks like to come out to the farm and like I'm gonna leave all my old problems behind. So he starts trying to go and get some farm animals and he sees this guy advertise a donkey for $100 and it's like it seemed pretty inexpensive and he goes there. It's a really old donkey and he's like okay, yeah, and he's like, well, how are you going to get it? You're going to need some kind of trailer. But he's like, why don't you buy it now, then come back when you have a trailer, you can take them. He's like, okay, great. So he pays him $100. He goes and borrows one of his neighbor's trailers, comes back to get the donkey. The donkey's dead. All right, the donkey's dead. And the guy's like, hey, well, just get my money back and we'll be fine. But can I do something different here? Should I just hold the mic? Let me just do this so I'm not tapping all day long. And so, there we go. So he goes ahead and he said, I'd love to give you my money. Hey, well, number one, I told you it was an old donkey. Number two, I already spent the money, so I guess it doesn't matter. So the guy's like, what do you want to do? He's like, well, take the donkey. He's like, you want a dead donkey? Well, yeah. So he takes the donkey and he says, let me grab this too. It was the little flyer that he had a sign up, with a picture of the donkey for sale for $100. He's like, let me take that too. All right, and so he's like, what are you going to do? He's like, I'll figure something out. So what he does, he goes into the little fair that's going on in town, and he's got this picture for a donkey for $100, but he says, hey, for $2 raffle tickets, you have a chance to win this donkey. And people are like, well, $2? I'll give it a risk for $2. And he gets over almost $500 worth of raffle tickets sold. All right, and when the old man that's at the fair, he's selling his little goods, he's like, so what are you doing? He's like, you're selling raffle tickets. Well, what happens when somebody actually wins it? Well, somebody did win it. All right, and I had to tip the terrible news that the donkey's dead, so I refunded his $2. But I still made almost $1,000 on this dead donkey. All right, and it's like, wow, there you go. So, I'm looking at this, and I'm like, that's a funny story. What a funny little ingenious way. Yeah, who's going to be that upset about losing $2? They know only one person's going to win it. The winner gets his $2 back. Nobody's upset. Is this like a good thing? Is that like a moral thing to do? Is it moral? Is it like the most evil thing I've ever heard of? I don't know, probably not. Is it good? It's hard to call it good. And then we get to this parable. And this parable is actually there's some similarities. So while we're going to read it, you're going to see what I mean by it. But let me make sure I just build the stage a little bit. This is it's all part of the same conversation. Jesus is at a room filled with the Pharisees. And this is why when he starts telling these parables of the lost coin, lost sheep, lost son, he's showing them that they should be rejoicing over these sinners coming back into the kingdom of God. These people that were lost that had now been found. They should have been rejoicing in heaven, just like the angels are rejoicing in heaven, that God has found some of his lost stuff in these believers. But now he turns his attention to his disciples. But again, the Pharisees are there. So anytime I know he's speaking to his disciples, we know he's going to kind of take the edge off. He never attacks his disciples. He'll attack the Pharisees, but he doesn't attack his disciples. So it's a little softer. And they don't ask a direct question here. But you can see as it gets started, what they're really asking is, hey, we're just sitting here. We weren't being jealous like these Pharisees. The Pharisees, you're right, Jesus. You were right on. You saw them. They were jealous over the way that you're treating these sinners, these prostitutes, these tax collectors. But we're good, right? We haven't done anything wrong, right? You know, like, I see this with my kids all the time. Like, if one gets in trouble, there's always one to sing, you know, like, I've been good, right, Dad? All right, like, you've been, like, not as bad, sure. Good is a hard term to actually say you've been good. All right, but, like, correct. In comparison to the one that just, like, threw a giant temper tantrum, yes, you were better than that one, if that's your bar. Yes, you were better than that. But, so this is kind of what the disciples were doing. Like, they were like, we've been pretty good, right? Like, we've been just sitting here. We weren't jealous, right? And Jesus like, yeah, but I got a parable for you too. So here's their parable. All right? A little small. You can read it on the app, of course. You can read it as you turn to Luke chapter 16 and verse 1. All right? He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. Wealthy man, he's got a manager, much as you would think of, like, you know, all the athletes and stuff. I've heard so many stories of, like, you know, actors, young actors and athletes that they trusted the wrong person with their money, squandered it. All right, squandered it. All right, and, you know, again, when that happens, you own some little, you know, inappropriately named town in the middle of, you know, Idaho or whatever, and that's because that's all you have left. All right, it's the only asset you have left. So I've heard so many stories of people, these wealthy people, trusted the wrong manager, ended up with nothing. All right, and so he hears the charge, this manager's wasting your money, verse 2. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the accounts of your management, for you can no longer be a manager. All right, and the manager said to himself, what shall I do since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. So I've decided to do so so I have decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. Let me just pause there for half a second. Get the picture here. Now, it calls him a manager, but don't think of him as like, oh, he's like a financial advisor, money manager. He's got one boss, okay? When you have one boss, he's like a servant, and he's going to call him that later. So he has a master, and his job as the servant is to manage the finances. And clearly, what we can see is that he has not been managing them well. You know, he is not either just thinks that the rich man's got so much money, he's never going to care what, you know, what's being spent, that he's being really lax, he's being really lazy, he's not managing things well, as we're going to see. All right, so, but he's now worried, like, I'm about to lose my job. This is not one client of his many clients. This is his only client. All right, and so he's like, what am I going to do? If I get kicked out of this guy's household, I can't, that's strong. I'm not very smart. What am I going to do? So he comes up with a plan, and his reasoning is, I got this idea, all right, and I'm going to summon my master's debtors one by one. So he says, when I'm removed from the house, people might receive me into their home. So he's thinking, I'm going to call on the debtors of my rich master. I'm going to be super nice to them, hoping that when I get fired, all right, because I'm definitely about to get fired, all right, then I can at least go to these other somewhat rich people and say, hey, remember when I cut a deal with you just a couple days ago? Remember when I gave you that great deal? Like, oh man, I kind of just need a job right now. I kind of need a place to crash for a little bit. He is 100% thinking about himself, but let's keep reading on the story. So he says, I've decided what to do, so when I'm removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. Verse 5, so, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said, take your bill, sit down quickly, write 50. All right, then to another, he says, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he says, take your bill, write me 80. Pause there, verse 7. Okay? Just to get, anytime we look at measurements when it comes to, every kind of translation decides to handle it a little differently. How are they going to do this? This is what the Greeks actually, the Greek words actually say here. 100 measures of oil. What's a measure of oil? All right? When you add up all this, what 100 measures of oil is, we are talking about 800 gallons of oil. 800 gallons, this would be olive oil. Don't think like, that's the only oil that matters. Mediterranean country, okay? One oil that matters here, all right? Olive oil, virgin olive oil, the good stuff. All right, I don't know if I have any, Italians in here. Like, when you talk about like a little bottle, that's like 16 or 17 bucks. I tried to look up on Amazon this morning. It depends on how nice an olive oil. I was gonna got a nice middle-of-the-road olive oil would be about $50 a gallon. Okay, that's a moderate. That's not the nicest you can get, but not that cheap stuff. That's you don't want something like Preston, Illinois. All right, you want something they've been doing this for a couple centuries on the stone. So $50 a gallon for olive oil, 800 gallons. We're talking like 60 grand. That's like a half a tanker truck of olive oil here. All right, so 60 grand. All right, when it talks about the bushels, it says a measure of wheat. All right, so 100 measures of wheat. All right, so that would be about 8 bushels of wheat would be a measure. So we're talking back to about 60,000 pounds of wheat. All right, again, doing the math, we're talking about $40,000. All right, worth of meat. All right, worth of wheat. This is big sums of money. All right, this is 2 clients. I'm sure there's more clients, but how many things you have to go through. So you can see what he's doing. These people owed huge. How did you let it get to so much debt? How did you lend out so much? Well, I'm sure this is kind of the parables, whether you want to look at this dishonest or shrewd, all right, that he's probably getting some kind of kickbacks from these guys. He's doing the wheeling and the dealing. He's taking care of himself and all these wheels and deals. But at the end of the day, he didn't actually take care of his master. All right, of all the things that he was doing for himself, the master's not getting paid back. And so when the master hears word, he's like, hey, listen, I see you lent out, an absolute cavalcade. I don't know how do you start measuring things when you're dealing with thousands of pounds of wheat? Like, you lent out a silo of wheat. Where's the income coming from this? Where's the income? And he wasn't concerned with the master's income. He's happy to spend the master's money to get these deals, make things for himself. And even when now he's pressed, he still doesn't kind of do the right thing. He's doing this because he's like, hey, hopefully I can kind of work a deal out for myself once I get fired. And then verse 8 comes, and the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. He commends, so he calls him dishonest. So at the top of your Bible, some label this as the dishonest manager. Some label this as the shrewd manager. Both are true. He is both dishonest and shrewd. All right, that he's dishonest in that he has not been collecting on the debts that should be making his master money. All right, but he is shrewd in that, hey, when kind of push came to shove, he came up with a really kind of clever deal. All right, he thought of a clever deal where all right, my master kind of doesn't hit the losses as bad as it looks. He's showing that your loss isn't that bad. All right, and maybe it kind of works out. If I get fired, it kind of works out well for me. All right, and when you can see why this is a challenging parable, because it's easy in the prodigal son to see who's the good guy. There's the father that loves his son and welcomes his son back and with open arms. Who's the good guy in the story of the lost sheep? It's the shepherd that loves his sheep so much. sheds a little tear and goes and gets the sheep. Like there's easy to see, there's so many of these parables that we look at and we're like, yeah, there's the good guy in the story. There's the good guy that kind of gives us a little, our application is this, be like the good guy. Like we get this example now to follow. And there's not a good guy in the story. The rich man isn't bad because he's rich, but he's a little kind of neglectful. He hasn't noticed that, like, who misplaces, 800 gallons of olive oil, and it's just like, oh man, couldn't even notice amongst my vast store of olive oil that I was missing 800 gallons. But he's not presented as a bad guy. He's not the good guy. He's just kind of, unaware, so wealthy that he doesn't even notice when he's missing just tens of thousands of dollars worth of goods. There's the manager. He's not a good guy. Like, he's been, at best, lazy, but most likely, they don't present it as lazy. I think they present it as deceptive. All right, that he has been gaining. He's been getting his percentages. He's been getting his kickbacks, and he hasn't actually been paying back the rich man that is his master. All right, and so applying this is actually really difficult. So I try to read a whole bunch of stuff and kind of look through it, and obviously I can read ahead a little bit, and you're going to see some of this stuff is going to come like, oh yeah, it says that a little bit later. It does. All right, and so, but we are having to stretch a little more than I naturally would. But he's talking to the disciples, all right, and he starts out with talking directly to these disciples. So we know he's wanting to give them a message. And what is the message that he's wanting to give them? And the message that he's wanting to give them is, you're this dishonest manager that has wasted some of what God has given you. You have wasted, and this fits in with other parables, like when we think of like the parable of the talents that we'll cover in a couple weeks, that you have wasted some of what the master has given you. You have wasted it. Now, what should you do now? All right? And when I think about our lives, it's so easy to get crippled by looking back over the last 5 years, or looking back over the last 15 years, or look back over the last 25 years. And it's easy to look and you're like, oh man, I feel like I've kind of wasted. Oh man, I'm a failure. I'm the dishonest manager. Oh man. One of the things, when I teach during the day, those are the kids, the normal college students. When I teach at night, so I teach on Monday nights, and those are older students. So I think our average age is in the 50s even. And so we have a lot of older students that are coming back to school to learn. And they all have similar stories. Like, what's caused me to come back here? They almost have all started some school years ago and then stopped. And they all kind of kicked themselves, just like, I kept feeling like I just didn't have time to go back, and I couldn't do it, and I didn't have the ability. And then I finally just decided, you know what, I'm going to do this, because I don't want another 10 years to pass where I could have looked back and said, if I took one class at a time, one class every semester, I'd have a doctorate by now. Like, when you look back, it's easy to see, like, yeah, I should have done it slowly, and I'd be done. Like, whatever new skill you want, if you could say, I'm going to start now, I'll be great at it in 5 years, sure. You can do anything. You can learn a language. You could, learn how to build stuff. All right? Like, you can do if you say, I'm going to actually work on something now for 5 years, but you know what's going to happen. In 5 years, you're going to be like, I wish I would have started 5 years ago. I'm probably really good at this. I'm probably really talented. I wouldn't even need to hire a plumber anymore if I would have worked on this 5 years ago. All right? Well, it's so easy to cripple ourselves with what we haven't done in the past and just drop our heads, droop our heads, and just admit that we're failures. And that's not what God wants of his disciples. He's not condemning them and saying, he doesn't walk in and say, you've been a dishonest manager, get out of my sight. All right? Here's this warning, uh-oh, the master's coming, and he's disappointed. He's upset. What does the manager do? This is where his shrewdness kicks in. He starts Like, let me do what I can. I got a few hours. Let me see what I can do in a few hours. So don't be obsessed about what you haven't done or haven't accomplished. Start something now. All right, again, it's so easy to look back and say, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have spent 6 months doing it. I wish I would have read the entire Bible by now. I wish I would have really started that ministry. I wish I would have kept up with this thing. I wish I would have done this with my kids. I wish we did this as a family devotional. I wish I had done this with my wife. I wish I had done this with my husband. It's so easy to point out all the things we wish we would have done. All right? But if we stop at, I wish I did that, and then just say, I'm the worst. I'm terrible. I'm worthless. All right? We're never going to actually do something. And the message here is do something now. Do something now. All those things that we thought were like, I failed, we can say, you know what? I did fail, but let me see what I can get done with the time I have left. Let me see what I can get done with the opportunity I have now. This is going to make more sense in the next couple verses, even though the verses get more complicated here in a second. So the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. All right? And so what he's saying is he says people in the world, non-believers, worldly people are better at this than believers are. All right? They're better at this. The world in many instances knows that it's not an all or nothing proposition, that it's either perfectly done or it's a failure. All right? We see this in a lot of, I see this in a lot of different, political practices. If you look at maybe where we had the attitudes of our country from 25 or 30 years ago to now, there's a couple areas that are really different. Maybe some things that are better, and I think there's definitely some things that are worse. I'll use an example of what we've seen in the LGBT community. What was once, 15 or 20 years ago was, hey, they shouldn't be discriminated against. We shouldn't discriminate against people for whatever their behaviors and actions are. We shouldn't discriminate. It shouldn't prevent them from getting a job. It shouldn't prevent them from, getting hospital visitation. It shouldn't prevent them getting, hospital care. And then we can look at that and say, I'm not trying to rip somebody's job away. Yeah, we don't want that. Okay. And then we start saying, okay, well, we're okay with this, we're okay with this. But what the agenda has continued to push is now it's mandated in our curriculum in schools. And now it's not only being just presented as should be allowable, but it's actually preferred. There's this kind of famous expression, what one generation tolerates, the next generation will encourage, the next generation will demand. And so we've seen this same kind of thing play out. And I think it's a good example here, where not everything, if there's someone that has an agenda when it comes to sinful sexual activity, it's not everyone has to agree with us now or we fail. It's, can we keep pushing the envelope? Can we keep pushing the agenda? And the answer is, of course it can. Of course that agenda can still get pushed. And I think of so many, when I think of so many sinful actions, so much of what the world tries to do is it's not trying to get everything or nothing. It just keeps pushing us down the line, creating new lines in the sand that we're willing to cross. We would never cross an ocean. But what about if we just put our toes in the water? What if we just wade out into our waist? What if we just swim out just a little ways? And it keeps just moving the line. And he comes out and he says, the world is better at dealing with their own generation and stuff than the sons of light. That we don't look at the same thing saying, okay, maybe we can't accomplish everything in our own life. Maybe we can't accomplish everything we would want in our children's lives, in our neighbors as we're talking to them and sharing the gospel with them. Maybe it doesn't do exactly what we want. We'd love for them to be repentant and turn and say, yes, I want to come to church with you and start worshiping with you, and I want to study everything it is throughout the Bible. We want everything, but what we can learn is that at times there is incremental change. And can we be patient through that incremental change? The world is not all or nothing. It takes what it can get. And when it comes to believers, I do think there is a role of saying, like, okay, can we accomplish something? Can we keep moving in the right direction? And this is whether in our own lives or other people's lives. I think it gets even more complicated in verse 9, but when, and it really just kind of depends on how you translate a couple of phrases in here. All right, and it says here in verse 9, and I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. So this sounds very different in different translations of Scripture. So I'm just going to read a couple to you. So in the New Living Translation, a much more interpreted translation, it says, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. All right, the New King James says this, I say to you, make friends for yourself by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. Similar to the New American Standard. And I say to you, make friends for yourself by means of wealth, by means of the wealth of the unrighteous, so that when it is all gone, they will receive you in the eternal dwelling. Or if you want to read the King James Version, I understand it not even a little bit. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. So I read a lot of different commentaries to kind of just try to get a gauge of what this was actually saying. And I do think it's pretty... I think the clearest way to take this is, number one, it's not saying that you are getting wealth through unrighteous means. All right, that the unrighteous wealth is connecting to the next verses that we'll read in just a moment. Just simply comparing that, like, this is worldly wealth. All right, meaning it's not wealth that's like, you know, bestowed, like we have gifts from above, we have gifts of the Spirit, we have, you know, the things that God blesses us with. And then there are the things that, you know, the world, quote unquote, blesses us with. When we go to a job, we get a paycheck. When we sell goods, we get money. And he's comparing that, well, there's heavenly wealth and there's earthly wealth. And that the unrighteous wealth here is not saying you got the wealth through, like, unrighteous means. You didn't, like, you know, lie and sell a dead donkey to someone. All right? You didn't lie to get it. You didn't cheat someone to get it. It's not saying gain your wealth through unrighteous means. It's just labeling the wealth as not, we're not talking heavenly wealth here. We're talking physical, literal, earthly, worldly wealth. All right? And when it says make friends for yourself by means which, all right, what he's saying is not making friends with people that have wealth. He's saying, how are you going to, so like we see a lot of the older commentaries make statements like that, yeah, we're supposed to give to the poor. We're supposed to give to those in need. Most of the later translations don't emphasize that. They don't think it's actually like specifically talking about giving to the poor, but that we are using our earthly wealth in order to make friends. All right, and there is something like one of the things that you like if you listen to interviews of athletes, especially, or people that win the lottery. You know, it really is a challenge to go from having nothing to all of a sudden making a whole bunch of money, because you have a lot more cousins than you have ever met, all right, at any family reunion ever. All right, there are third cousins that remind you, like, oh, like, no, remember we played together that one time in the pool? I was like my best friend. You know, like, they were like, we were two, you don't remember this? You know, like, it can be really difficult, you know. You hear stories of guys that says, like, you know, yeah, they're playing ball, you know, in the park, and they all kind of look at each other, you know, spit in your hand saying, hey, if any of us make it, you know, we take care of everybody else. And so even if you make a few $1 million, you look at yourself and you say, like, well, how do you make $17 million and spend it all? Yeah, because when you have 17 friends that all think you promised them $1 million, all right, that money disappears real fast. And when you have, if you're putting people on salary for 60 grand a year to, help open your car door and hold an umbrella over your head, it goes away real quick. And I don't envy it. I've heard a lot of athletes kind of recommend, you make it, you got to move out, you got to cut everybody off. When the kid that, I don't remember, a couple of years ago now, a kid right around here won the Super Powerball, like $100 million or whatever he won. And he lived right around the corner from here. All right? He was like 19 years old. Moved. Up and moved. All right? That guy is somewhere in Montana where nobody knows him. Because I get it. Like, how do you grow up somewhere, win $100 million, and not have everybody come out of the woodwork looking for help? And it's got to be difficult. You want to be able to help people. And where he's warning here would be easy to say, hey, if you have wealth, you got to move away. You got to get away. If you earn whatever you earn, there's going to be leeches. Be careful. Save your money. Invest wisely. But what he's actually saying here is, go ahead. Make earthly money. Make earthly wealth. And use that to make friends with people. Okay? Use that to make friends with people. When it fails, all right? When the finances fails, no problem. Because if you have been good and righteous, which come in, if you have been a good and faithful servant of God, there is an eternal dwelling waiting for you and for them if your friendship has actually resulted in them coming to Christ. So there's a term we use, it's more of a missions term. We use this term tent making. And tent making is a term that we usually talk about it when it comes to the mission field. And it comes from when the Apostle Paul would travel around, he wouldn't actually charge money for his ministry. So it's not like he went to Galatia, and he went to Philippi, and he went to Colossae and says like, hey, here, I'm happy to stay with you guys and teach you guys the Word of God and kind of be your pastor here for a little bit. So kind of just take some of your offering plates in the back, make an offering, this is the only way I make money. Paul specifically says, I won't do that. He would get some money from his church in Antioch, and sometimes when he was in Jerusalem, he would get money to then go, to be able to go and spread the gospel. But when he would go from city to city, when he would go to Galatia, and Colossae, and Philippi, he would make tents and sell them. All right? He'd make tents and sell them. This is where we get the term tent making, is that he would make tents and sell them. That's how he's making his money. That's how he's able to minister. All right? And he's able to be a minister of the gospel because he makes tents. All right? Now, the challenge with tent making is, how much time do you spend making tents versus sharing the gospel? All right? How much time? Knowing that when you make more tents, you can make more money. All right? But he knows his purpose is to share the gospel with people. And so there is this automatic little rub. And so this is one of the things we kind of debate in what we call missiology, is there are those of us that see the real value of like, hey, instead of fundraising nonstop, and having to spend, it's the ironic part, when missionaries have to go around and fundraise, about a third of the money they fundraise is used to fundraise. Because traveling in America is really expensive. It might be really inexpensive to live in India or in Jakarta or in South America, but it's really expensive to be traveling around the United States for a few months raising funds. But you don't want some missionary up and going to India, like having to ministering to these people here who don't know the gospel and taking money from them. We don't want that. That certainly is really, you can't bring the gospel that way. So we would need the local church to do that. And usually one individual church is not able to fund someone's entire life. So it takes lots of churches and lots of individuals, which then takes lots of travel. You can see the challenge in it, that you don't want to charge the people you're ministering to, so you got to go back home. So tent making is a great alternative to that. That whatever you do, if you're a mechanic, all right, if you are in construction, if you are in finance, if you are in, one of my favorite stories is this kid that went to a Urbana conference, a missions conference, and he worked for Verizon at the time. Just one of those little graduated from college, didn't quite know what to do, got an opportunity to work at Verizon. He was laying fiber optic cable. Like, so he wasn't the guy digging the holes, so there were the guys digging the holes, and then he'd be the guy that like laid it in the hole and says, all right, that looks good, and then they would cover up in the hole. So his job was to, you know, the cable's going down, and he says, looks good. And they'd lay more cable, looks good. Pretty good, yeah, that's not the worst job. He reached out to Verizon and he says, hey, you know, I actually kind of interested in going overseas somewhere. And I was wondering if I could work. And they were like, yeah, actually, like, we have tons of need in the United Arab Emirates. All right, like, if you go there, all right, not only will we make you like a supervisor, that you'll be over the person that's the one looking in the hole, giving a thumbs up. You get to make sure, you good? You get to give a thumbs up to the guy giving the thumbs up as he's laying the fiber optic cable in the hole. All right? He says, so we make you a manager, and we're going to pay you like, you know, 80 grand a year to do that, with a place to stay over there, with expenses, with 2 trips back to the United States every year, plane flight. He's like, I'll take it. All right? So now, what he was doing in the United States, he now gets to go to the United Arab Emirates. He got paid more, and now he's in this other country, and he was able to start, because he had, you know, time off, just like we all do. We have our time, we have some freedom. And he spent his time working with some of the local churches, helping bring material in, doing some discipling of local church pastors, you know, starting Bible studies. He was in a little, the place he was staying had other workers from Verizon. He's able to start a Bible study there, sharing the gospel with people all over the world. He worked with people from China and India and Pakistan, and there's all these people. And he was just sharing about, hey, because I literally just went to Verizon, I'm able to do the same thing. In fact, in the promotion, I can do the same thing overseas. There is this great benefit of people when you are able to just do the same thing you do on the mission field. Again, we call this tent making. Now here, what this passage seems to be saying to me is tent making with relationships is possible. It is possible to make money here in this world for the purpose of building relationships with people for the sake of the gospel. All right? But this is a challenge, and he knows this. So this is why he says, here's the part of the verses that we actually know. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. And the one who is dishonest in very little will be dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, okay? So if you've not been faithful in, you know, the worldly just finances that we have, who will entrust you the true riches? True riches being compared, there's the unrighteous, worldly, earthly riches. The true riches are things that are eternal. Eternal heavenly things. How are you going to be entrusted with that? And if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. All right, and so he's laying out this foundation, again, talking to his disciples, that right now, all you are is just managing what God has given you. You are managing, and honestly, you're not managing it super well. You're not doing great. Okay? You have very little, you know, you were a little fisherman, you were faithful, you were a little faithfulness, but you kind of had some failings there. Are you really wanting all the gifts of the kingdom? Do you really think you're ready to handle everything? What would show me, your master, that you are ready to handle everything? All right? And the ultimate little call here is, he knows that this is a challenge. He knows that this whole tent making with relationship thing is really difficult. And that it is impossible, not difficult, it is impossible to serve both God and money. And this is something that I do think is easier as you are, you know, when I love sitting with my college students, okay, they haven't made any money yet, they're making minimum wage, you know, they are, they have next to nothing. It's easy to say, like, okay, you're about to get a job, you're about to start making more money. how you handle that, the way you view your job, the way you view finances is going to carry you into a certain direction when it comes to you serving God and ministry. And when you start setting good foundations now, it's going to set you up for the future. It's harder that most of us in here are in our careers. All right? We are in that spot where we're able to look back on 10 or 15 years and say, have I really been managing my life, my finances well? Have I fallen into a spot of loving money, not even just more than I love God, just loving money, knowing that how do I love money at the same time that I love God? And we can look back and see like, yeah, this is complicated. It is complicated. And he is drawing a line in the sand here that we can't serve both masters. We're going to love one and hate the other. And I think the ultimate conclusion that we come from this is that the purpose of your life cannot be both serving God and making money. But you can make money to serve God. All right? You can. And it is possible. And it is difficult. And it is something that God, in many instances, is going to reveal to us more as we show ourselves to be more faithful, that we are going to be then given more responsibility. I think there's two reasons I haven't won the lottery. Number one, I don't play the lottery. It does make it harder to win. It is a little fun fact. The first two people to win the Florida State Lottery didn't buy tickets. One was given as a gift, and the second one found the ticket on the ground. All right, so I'm saying there's a chance. I'm saying there's a chance. I think the second reason I haven't won the lottery is I think clearly I wouldn't handle it well. I think if God knows that, like, oh, if I give Joe $80 million, he's going to turn around and give that all and use that all for my glory. No, there's probably a chance I'd do a couple of nice things. I would do a few really kind things for a couple people, and I would move away to Montana. I don't know. How do I don't even have a baseline to figure out what I would do with that. I don't even know. All right? I guess the only thing I can look at is I've seen in my life when I get a raise, that money all gets spent really easily. Like, it's never hard to make more money and to spend more money. That's been really easy, actually. All right? When I made less, I spent less, and I have about the same margin, I easily fall into the tendency of thinking how money can solve some little problems. You're like, oh, if I did this, this would solve this issue. This would solve this issue. And I just use money to solve problems. And my immediate thought isn't, if I get some money, how can I use this to benefit others in a way that I might be able to share the gospel with them, and it might be a valuable kind of relationship that's not meant to, benefit me in any way, but is meant to glorify God. And even if it's something I see like, maybe this kind of benefits both people, the parable seems to be kind of like, yeah, your dishonesty can actually end up glorifying God in certain ways. The parable is difficult, but the ultimate application here, I think, is easier to grasp. I think the ultimate application of money is not the problem. Money is actually a great solution in helping people, and is actually a great piece of building friendships. All right, and the difference is where we look at maybe wealthy people that then start to question, is this person really friends with me, or are they just friends with me because I have like really cool stuff? Or are they just friends with me because they're trying to get stuff from me? And that does seem like a lonely thing for like a millionaire to be wondering, like, are any of my friends real and genuine, or do they just like what I have? And what we get to do is turn that on its head and actually say, I'm actually not worried about if they're a good friend to me. I can be a good friend to them. And I can use all that God has given me. I can use all of what God has given me to minister to other people and make friendships that have eternal consequences, is the right word I'm looking for, eternal rewards attached to them. It's easy to look at this and say, like, well, great, like, I'm not wealthy. Yeah, I think in about every terminology I can look at when it comes to the biblical perspective, we are, like, grossly wealthy. We are disgustingly wealthy in comparison to the room. And it's only because we live in a weird little spot in a weird little moment in time where we have this kind of like middle class thing happening in the Western world, and a half of Western countries, where like we can actually look and say, oh, but there's people that are really wealthy, and that when God says wealthy, he must mean people wealthier than me, because he can't mean me. All right? I would tend to say that the average person, when talking about a normal person in the Bible, they had to work that day in order to eat. And if they didn't work, they would go hungry. And you, if you didn't work tomorrow, would not go hungry. And you probably wouldn't go hungry for a couple days. And you probably wouldn't go hungry for a couple weeks. And you might not go hungry for a couple months. And maybe a couple of you wouldn't go hungry for a couple of years. And if you looked at someone and says, oh yeah, if I didn't make any money for the next 3 months and I would be fine, they'd be like, dude, teach me. How did you get this? How did you get that amount of money? Are you insane? You could buy 300 gallons of olive oil with that money. You're like, you're right. I guess I really could buy about 300 gallons of olive oil with that. Like, that's how you judge me? Like, that's amazing. Like, that is pretty amazing, I guess. I would have a lot of olive oil. If you read yourself as this story, that you are the wealthy one, that is expected to use what you have to build friendships in order that you can actually reveal heavenly treasures to them. And that if you start showing yourself faithful in little things, you're going to start seeing God trusting you in greater things. And it's not this promise like, that's what you hold out for. When God starts trusting you with greater things, then you get to start hoarding that money. No, it's when he starts trusting you with greater things, you start giving even more and serving even more this way and providing even more for others. Let's close in prayer. God, this is certainly one of those kind of self-reflective sermons where it can, the value of the interpretation, the application for each of us individually, it is going to feel so different. I see what you clearly say. We can't love both you and money. All right? That we can't be taking all that you have provided for us and just used it for our own gain. All the gifts and abilities that you have given us that we've just used for ourselves. That's clearly not what you want. You clearly want us to use what you have given us for others. Use what you have given us for your kingdom and your glory. But now when we start to apply this personally of like, what does this look like for me? What does this mean for me? I think we can end up in lots of different directions. I think we can end up seeing things in lots of different ways. And this is that kind of challenge of what does it mean to be shrewd with our finances and shrewd with our giftings, shrewd with our abilities. And it's not the normal word that we would think about when thinking about the kingdom of God, what you are calling for us in our life. This is certainly building on, we know you want us to be righteous, and we know you want us to be kind, and we know you want us to be good. But this is kind of that prayer for wisdom on how to handle things. This is that prayer for wisdom on what do you want us to do. I think there is this recognition, okay, God, this is what you have given me. How do you want me to use this, God? This isn't just what do I want to do with it, but God, what do you want me to do with it? I recognize you as my master. I recognize that I am just a steward of all that you have given me. And I want to be shrewd in how I use what you have given me, clever in how I use it, wise in how I use it. But God, we need your wisdom in this area. We are going to need your guidance more than anything, God. So God, I pray if there's anything you want to bring to our attention, I pray you do it in the quiet of this moment. I pray you do it as we're driving home from church today, in our car heading to work tomorrow, right when that paycheck hits next Friday, just that pause of God, how can I use this for your honor and your glory? Let us be willing to make difficult choices and decisions. In Jesus' name I pray.